Okay, audio 1, 2. That's what I do right before I record. Anyway, happy week 13 in Python. And at this point, I'm recording a little bit early. Normally I do it on Friday, but this week, because there's no Learn Together, I don't have anything necessarily to talk about. And I've done a handful, not a handful, not even half of the students in this class have done their code reviews yet, but what I've seen so far was fun to talk about, fun to look at. It's always interesting to look at how people approach problems and how they solve them. So what I want to do today is I want to talk just a little bit about my implementation of my Dev one. It's I would say I'm almost happy with it. It's true with code. Feels like you're never quite happy. It's like, well, I could do this, I could implement this, and I definitely had some things I wanted to do, which is, by the way, a great reason to do a to-do list. Shout out to Isaac Lowe, who did one, and it was great because it helped him get organized around it. So if you don't have to-do lists, it's good to make them. So I'm just going to briefly go over just how my file structure ended up, and just probably what I spent more time on than I thought I would is writing the summary data, because once I got the file thing figured out, that was not that bad. So I'm going to show you that. And then, because I talked about in week 12, which I just kind of looked at since it's been a minute since I recorded that. So in other words, spring break has happened. And I thought, yeah, I talked to you guys already. So this is the first week you see the change of moving the graphical, key T Kenter, I'll get it, up in the schedule. And then we will end our semester after we do 3 weeks and you can see this here, part 1, part 2, part 3. And then we're going to cover how to do OOP, object-oriented programming, basically class implementation. And I'm actually going to end part 3 of um, looking at the graphical user interface with how to do it in a class way. I was thinking of sequence on that. But here's what I want you to know. 2 things. First, when I roll forward and look at the schedule, unlike now, right? Unlike this, ooh, that's wrong, should be there. Anyway, unlike the Dev 1 that we've just done, students have the week after to do code reviews. That doesn't happen for Dev 2. So I will have appointments. Of course, the sooner you come in, the better. But I will have appointments starting probably Friday, then the 5th, 14th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th will be the last day. And I'll have that schedule available probably the first week of May. So just FYI, I just want you to know that going in so you have an idea. But speaking of, our last Dev 2, conceptually, here's what I want you to know. Generally, students will take what they've done, their code for Dev 2, and then implement that in a graphical user interface. Okay. So if you decide you want to do a different topic, know it still needs to meet the requirements of what Dev 2 required, okay? Which is often why students take whatever their output was. So what you're basically doing in this case is you're taking the base concept, implementing a graphical user interface. So where you were before interacting with the command line, you'd be interacting with the graphical user interface to Kenter. But that's not all, because you also have to understand the way Kenter works, how it renders the screen, that cycle. So it's not just, it is definitely wrapping your head around that. And then we end the semester, and this is really kind of the part I wanted to talk about. We end the semester covering OOP, object-oriented programming. And I'm almost thinking, although I don't want to, I don't know why I don't want to say it, but I'm almost thinking to make that you can implement your graphical user interface as a class implementation. And I think once you see that example of the guy we see doing the tutorials, which by the way are awesome. He does a really nice job. See how he implements a class using that software. You might go, oh yeah, I got that and I want that experience. Or you might go, you know what? No, I think I'm just going to focus here. And I'm trying to kind of in my head say, since this is the first time I've done it this particular way, that'd be okay. Meaning, if you decide not to do the OOP, you'll at least see the implementation and get the idea, because we'll cover it, these last 2 weeks before the end of the semester. That would probably be okay too. So I want you to think about that as we're going into this. For sure, you have to build a graphical user interface for what you had in Dev2, again, unless Dev1, unless you want to do something different. Okay, that's an unless. By the way, come talk to me about that, just because it's good to have that so that you understand based on what you're going to do. We can talk about, okay, here are the requirements, make sure your code does that. So it's really your choice. I try to give as much flexibility while meeting the requirements as I can. Okay, any questions about that? So if you do, replying is a good thing. So what I wanted to show you, bringing up my code, was really what I ended up doing. So I ended up writing 3 little functions, one very little one. And by the way, this is a good point to say this. Most of your code really should be inside of a function. Okay. Very, very minimal code should be outside of a function. Most of the stuff you can place into a function and either just call that function once, or oftentimes what we're doing when we're writing function is so that we can reuse them. Like I ended up doing this for here because I knew there were going to be parts of my code that I wanted to read that JSON file, not write to it, just read the contents of it. So writing a read function made sense because I could reuse it. But even if I'm not reusing that code, thinking and writing in smaller functions, it doesn't, I mean, there's no minimal, right? Is there a maximum? Probably, right? But it's more conceptually, I want that one function to have a clear input and a clear output. If I'm doing several things in there, it's probably too much, and I should offload it into to its own function, and then either pass data from one function to the other or reference global data. And that's modular code. And really, the other reason for that is maintenance. So that if you come back later and you're trying to figure out, oh yeah, where did I write code that handled the write to the JSON? Well, I clearly have, in this case, a place I do that. So here was my output file for my entries, coming back to here. Made me do a little tangent there about functions. But I was happy with this. So I had my JSON file that was a data dictionary with an array called EV entries, and each item in the array was a data dictionary. And then what I did in my code, more so in the summary data, which was kind of fun to figure out, is I used the filter method to filter first on email, because I asked so here, going back to here, anybody using this has to provide a valid email, which is validated by a regular expression. And then the first thing I would do is filter by that email that they gave me, because what you want to do is go through that file minimum number of times. I'd want to first go through it filter by email, then filter by home charging, supercharging, right? Give some summary data there. And then if the length of that email filtered, equal to 0, then output. Else, go ahead and do some of the statistics reporting that I talked about, some of the summary data in this case. And I found a fairly simple way, and I gave a reference here to doing it, where I did a sum, basically just put it on a called string or called print, and then did a sum based on that. And in this case for D, it's funny how you often have to reread your own code to figure out what you did. Temp. Yeah, so I'm actually wondering why I didn't use these. Oh, you know what? I think I wrote this after. Oh, that's why. And that's the other thing, right? About re-looking at your code, it's like, oh, why did I do that? Oh, actually, total cost. I did total cost of charging so far. So I actually could have went off the email in that case, right? And the average cost of all charging sessions. Actually, these two now are going to be wrong because I wrote these before I implemented the email. So I need to go back. I'm glad I looked at that because of that reason. The other thing was the Pep 8 was really fun. I really thank you, Isaac, for reminding me it was you who did that, told me about it, because I'm just finding it so much, it makes my code writing much cleaner, right? So hopefully you're all getting that as well. So anyway, that's how I ended up with mine. I was happy pretty much with the output. I think the one thing I'd probably change is that instead of actually getting a little more user input, like right now, I'm just asking for their email. Are they home charging, supercharging, and how many miles when they started? But that's not really realistic. I used this concept for my JavaScript class, and I ended up implementing a quick entry that was just that, like coming home, plugging in, knowing you're going to charge up to where you've set the battery. And the other one is a quick entry or a detailed entry where you're actually saying, and it's probably a supercharger. It could be home, but probably a supercharger. The idea that I drove in was 75 miles. I left with 150, right? And therefore calculating the cost based on that beginning battery and ending battery state. So that'd be the one thing I want to implement, but I spent more time just first writing, handling my functions to handle reading that JSON, and then doing that summary data. So it was fun. It's always interesting when I get to code something because the idea is that I'm trying to put on those glasses again of what it's like to approach a problem that or a concept that I have in my head that I'm trying to get code to do. And in my case, because I'm teaching two programming languages, I get to say, okay, how do I do this in JavaScript and how do I do this in Python? So it's a real good thing for my brain to flip that around. Okay, so to end this up, next week, as I've said, we move into our first of 3 parts of graphical user interface. We'll end that part 3, which I need to amend, with showing an implementation of class in using a graphical user interface. And then we have 2 sections of OOP to end the class. And then I've gone over the Dev2, the last dev, the timing of that, so that you have hopefully an understanding going forward. And yes, at this point, we're not using Al's course. Oh, and by the way, I did see over spring break, Al is actually recording some new content. So if you want to check that out on YouTube. Um, so, and I'm not going to be, see, Al, trying to remember, let's say automate the boring stuff. Not the, oh, look, there's an audio book for that. That's cool too. Let's see. So if you get to Al's Automate the Boring Stuff, you can actually see that he started doing some new content. Some of the stuff is pretty old. I should have went. Actually, this was like his first one was 215. But if you go to his channel, and you look at some of his videos, which I don't know why it came up in my list, but when I did it, I saw he was actually doing some new content. Like this was a day ago, 3 days ago, 6 days ago, a week. So he kind of stopped after doing 1 or 2. Oh, maybe he's redoing the whole thing. Oh, yeah, it looks like he's redoing the whole thing, which is cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So, check that out as well. I know I had at least one student who told me they looked at the ebook. I've recommended that before. I definitely think checking the ebook is a good idea because he tends to he updates that content, and there's some really good stuff out there. So, and because we're moving away, this is still true though, is finding good sources. of reading content that helps you, or looking at code implementations and different newer ways to do things, because it's always evolving. And in a community as big as Python, there's always something to learn. There's always something new to try out. Okay, I think that's it for me. Have a great week 13, and I'll see you next week. Peace out.